Hey there, and welcome back to the Philanthropy Mastermind series. I'm assuming you've been here before, but if you haven't, my name is Jay Frost, and it's a pleasure to have you. I'm going to be introducing our guest in just a second, but before that, I want to welcome you and encourage you to participate in this conversation, because this is one of the rare chances you'll have to actually have a dialogue with one of the premier figures in the world of healthcare philanthropy. Actually, that's probably too reductive to describe Betsy Chapin Taylor. But it is true that this is one of those chances you'll have to really engage in a conversation with her. So if you would like to do that, you can use the chat or the Q&A. We'll be monitoring both throughout. Both I and our producer, Jack Frost, will be doing that. But also, this may be a chance for you to just sit back and enjoy, especially as a preview for AHP. So if you're not aware, AHP is coming up in just a few days. And I hope you won't view this in lieu of AHP. If you haven't signed up yet, I hope you'll go. Betsy, in addition to other things, will be doing a 4-hour session, interactive session there. So please use this as a way to whet your appetite for a conversation at the conference. But for right now, we're going to be talking, of course, about supercharging patient giving by harnessing donor insights and opening the aperture on gratitude. And so it's great to have you here, Betsy. Thanks so much for hanging out today.
Thank you. It is great to be with you today, Jay. It's always good to have a rollicking conversation with a friend.
It's great to have a conversation with you. And I'm really looking forward to this one because of the subject matter you've chosen to talk about. But before we get into it, I want to give people just a little bit of a background on you in case they don't know your work. In summary, you've been in the field for over 30 years. Of course, you're well known as not only the person behind Accordant Philanthropy, which is a healthcare consulting firm, but also the author and editor of a number of books in the field: Healthcare Philanthropy, Advanced Charitable Giving to Your Organization's Mission, et cetera, et cetera. There are a number of these, so we'll put all those in the show notes. You want to pick those up and put them on your shelf. But also, in addition to leading Accordant, Betsy is a faculty member for the American College of Healthcare Executives. That's ACHE, in case you're following those acronyms, a faculty member for the Governance Institute, and a frequent speaker, as I just mentioned, at AHP and many other conferences in the US and around the world. And she also has not only an FAHP, but the Cy Seymour Award, which is not, it's something that's held by very few people, the people who are really those who have extraordinary experience and impact on the sector, but also inspire the rest of us, as Betsy always does. So thank you so much again, Betsy, for being willing to share and be a part of a conversation today.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
So we have a lot to talk about. And before we begin the conversation today, you shared a few notes that I want to make sure I lean into, speaking of leaning in. And maybe we can start with just talking about this whole world of grateful patients. There may be people who have a lot of experience with that with us. Some people don't. So can we just start with a little bit of defining the terms here and why grateful, who are they? Why is it important? And especially, why is it important now?
Sure, absolutely. So, Jay, as you know, we talked about having kind of an unwebinar today. No slides, just great conversation between friends. Hopefully it will be refreshing. You can sit back with a cup of coffee and just enjoy being part of this today. So, I think we've talked about grateful patient giving going all the way back to around 2007. At that point, the advisory board company think tank brought out a report that said that 88% of the largest gifts to healthcare organizations were made by patients or family members. Now, at the time, they talked about gratitude, but they didn't really say that that's what they knew it was. But Accordant then did a study with the National Research Corporation and asked people what their motivation was. And people came back resoundingly and said, it was gratitude. I was in this experience with someone where I needed a guide, I needed an advocate, I needed someone to intervene. And I felt gratitude that someone stepped forward for me and took care of me in that place.
This word gratitude, as you said, people are embracing this concept. I wonder if people have always understood it to have the impact it has.
I don't don't know that they have. And one of the things that we've tried to really do is have fidelity to the neuroscience and psychology of gratitude. That gratitude can sound a little squishy, it can sound a little kumbaya, but there's actually a lot of research that's been done over the last 30 years looking at gratitude, its qualities and characteristics. And so we know that there are a few things that need to happen. So first, someone needs to anticipate your needs. Someone needs to step forward. And in stepping forward, it needs to be something that was unexpected and unsolicited, that you didn't say, oh, will you help me over here? That instead someone saw you as a human being and they decided to respond to you. And when they responded to you, they did so in a way that was freely giving of themselves. It was intentional and it was worthwhile. And you, by them doing this, felt that you were understood or validated or cared for. So there's a lot of psychology that goes into this. And when those things occur, you feel motivated to step forward and express thankfulness to this person. And they say that in some part, this could be almost an evolutionary concept, that when people find others who care for them, they want to bind themselves to them. They want to make sure they have a relationship. And so saying, thank you for doing something for me is in some part making sure you sustain the relationship with that other person.
As you're talking about this, it strikes me that we saw this example, but not with that term applied, gratitude, for years in the corporate sector, right? That the companies that let's say you bought a computer online and then it was hard to reach them by phone when you had a bit of a problem, you reacted one way, but then, and I'll use Apple as an example because I'm looking at 3 Apple screens right now. So this is not endorsed by Apple. But if something went wrong, at least for many Apple users, Apple was quick to respond to you as a human being, or at least that was the experience many people had. And so that's why they went back. And in fact, then there was a corporate survey, I can't remember who conducted it, looking at lots of companies and just saying that if you made a mistake and then came back to people and corrected the mistake, they were more likely to be retained as a customer than if you had done everything right in the first time and then never talked to them again. And I'm wondering what took us so long to understand these concepts in our field and then apply a label that makes so much sense, like gratitude.
Absolutely. Well, and the other thing I've said to countless people is, why were we looking at our community at large? There was a long period of time where we were looking at our whole community to step forward out of civic responsibility or out of respect for our organizations. But it was so stunningly obvious that those who were patients and family members had had a direct experience with our organizations, that had often been transformational or had often given them, hope, opportunity, their life back. And so just like you wouldn't give to a school you didn't go to, or you wouldn't give to a religious organization that you didn't believe in their beliefs, of course the people who wanted to step forward for us were patients. But it took us until the early 2000s to really lean in around that.
I wonder why that's so. Is that just how our offices were structured, or that we didn't have the evidence, or what is it?
I don't know what it was, but I think about back early in my career, back or far enough back that I don't want to talk about it. We were like pulling lists of the whole community and sending out direct mail and doing other things to try and galvanize a constituency that may not have cared about us at all, that they should have cared about our hospital as part of the social fabric of our community, but they were not intrinsically motivated to step forward. They didn't have passion necessarily for our cause, but when we started focusing on patients and family members, clearly passion and experience and all those things came in the door. The other thing, Jay, that I think is really fascinating is that when you ask people why they were grateful in healthcare, it is actually often not about an accurate diagnosis and treatment, that they feel like they came to our hospital and paid their bill, brought their insurance card, were covered under Medicare, whatever it may be. So there was a basic expectation that you were delivered an appropriate diagnosis and care. So the magic in like stepping forward, seeing people, making them feel cared for was all about the emotional and social dimensions of care. It was about compassion. It was about kindness. It was about engaging with other humans in a human way.
Just all of our experience with medical care, we're vulnerable. And I imagine that all those things you just described also, if they're done right, it builds trust. And trust is foundational, not just to making sure we make the right medical decisions with somebody we trust, but also whether or not we decide to give to an organization that asks for our support. This is something you know well from both sides. I mean, you've talked about this publicly about how you have lived this experience both as a a practitioner in development, but also as a patient. Does that influence your view about this whole issue about grateful patients and how we treat our patients?
Absolutely. So, I've been spending too much time doing healthcare for myself. I have a long roster of doctors, and those doctors are unfortunately subjected to being part of an ongoing social science experiment that I think about, like, how were you treated at patient intake and access during the registration process, when you were sitting in the room, when you were engaging with others. And I'm not critical. I'm curious about what people do and how they engage, because we know that there are antecedents to gratitude. Gratitude doesn't just occur fully formed, that there are things that are part of the human connection, such as trust, feeling that someone has a commitment to you, feeling satisfaction at the experience that was there, that are all kind of critical precursors to creating an environment of gratitude. Some of the work that I've been really nerding out about recently, I went and reviewed hundreds of journal articles on PubMed, looking at what patients said they wanted. It was in my mind the idea of the good doctor. What is a good doctor? What do we want from them? Because I think that sometimes we assume that what we want is someone with an excellent professional pedigree, that we care where they went to med school, where they did their fellowship, what their clinical outcomes are. And all of those things, and being experienced and scientifically knowledgeable, are important in demonstrating competence. However, what people indexed on very heavily was the interpersonal relationships that they had with these people, that they said a good doctor listens to me attentively. They communicate with me effectively in a way that I understand, in language that is relatable to me. They love other human beings. They show compassion and kindness. They're engaged with me. And so when you think about gratitude, another piece of the research that I think is important is that we are really shaped by what we perceive as the goodness of the giver, the goodness of someone who stepped forward and helped us. And so, for us to have gratitude to the clinician, the physician, I think it's really important to know what the good doctor looks like. And again, it goes back to those emotional and social dimensions of care.
As you're talking about this, it strikes me that probably your experience over time, you probably have a different understanding of this than you did maybe 20, 30 years ago, right? So how did that change for you? And then what are some of those things maybe that you learned along the way, especially early on, that can be applied in a tactical way by development officers to show that they're actually, for example, like a good doctor, listening? Because there isn't a lot of training these days on listening, especially when much of our work is virtual.
There's not. So, I went into this field 30 years ago because I felt healthcare was a noble profession, that the provision of health was fundamental to people being able to live the lives they wanted to live, other things. So healthcare always, to me, spoke to me intellectually. And I also recognized that I'd had people in my life, my parents, my grandparents, others that I'd seen receive care. But I think once you're thrust into that situation of being a patient yourself, navigating this journey, I definitely see it differently than I did before. And I've just, too many of you on this call know me. I've just gone through round 2 of breast cancer. And, every time the Andy Grammer song, I'm going to try not to cry. I think you should know you saved my life. Every time that song comes on, I think about Katie Zier, who is my genetic counselor. And I think about Kirsten Hoffheimer, who would probably be horrified that I just said their names out loud, because they stepped forward for me. They didn't treat me like a patient record number or like a person on their roster. They treated me like a girl who has kids, has dreams, has things she loves to do. And those relationships have just been magic. But what we also know is things like compassion, being that humanistic clinician, they are not like eye color, they are like muscles. You can build it. And so I think that there's something to be said for selecting the right partners who are already kind of hardwired toward having, love for other people. That would be great. But there's also a part that people can build those muscles. They can build those skills. They can become good listeners. They can become attentive. And so, there was a study that was done by Steve Treziak, who I think is super cool. Dr. Steven Treziak, he's at Cooper up in New Jersey. And he went to other physicians and he said, compassion is really important. And more than half of the physicians said back to him, hey, I don't have time for compassion. Do you know how busy I am? I'm focused on throughput. I'm focused on performance. I don't have time for compassion. But they did a study and they found it only took 40 seconds to display compassion by asking people how they were, what they were thinking about, very simple things. And so, one of the things that I feel Stephen Treziak's research demonstrated is that it was not a binary choice between performance and compassion. It could be both. And I think that's exciting for our profession because, at this point, frankly, medicine's not in a great place. Medicine has become increasingly technology focused, business oriented. We talk more about throughput and revenue and clinical indicators than we talk about human beings. And physicians have said it makes their work feel like a commodity to them. And yet, of all the jobs that anyone could have, having the sacred trust of caring for another human's body, this very profession should be the personification of purpose. And so I think we've got to go back there. Physicians say when they applied to medical school, they applied because they wanted to help other humans, because they cared about other humans. We've lost that. We must go back there.
This is also, again, another parallel between clinicians and fundraisers, I would think, in that many of us join because we want to do good in the world. We certainly don't do it for the money. And by the way, for those who don't pay attention to it, doctors have a lot of expenses. So they're not always in it for the riches either. They're in there to care for people. That's where it all starts. But neither of us really get a lot of training in these soft skills is a horrible expression, but in these kinds of empathy expressions that you're talking about that are so fundamental to getting to know one another and showing that we care. And then there's this other risk, right? That as we do this, sometimes fighting to be almost cold about our exterior so we can survive, and sometimes leaning in, like you've been talking about, leaning into that experience of empathy, there's a danger of burnout. Can you talk about that a bit, both for the clinician side, but also for us, and what we can do to try and address that?
Absolutely. I mean, burnout is a huge issue. 47% of physicians say they are burned out. They are emotionally exhausted. They have lost their resilience. They have lost their joy in work. As a consequence, 1 in 4 physicians is thinking about leaving the profession. We also have the highest rate of suicide amongst clinicians that we've ever seen. That is a travesty. And so, we look at what's getting us there. And a lot of physicians have said, I don't have any time. It's systems. My scheduling is out of control. The mid-level providers who could assist me are not working to the top of their license. And so we've created these constraints where there's just more and more pressure. And physicians are also spending way too much time looking at an EMR and not looking at a human. But there's been a lot of research done around what would ease burnout. And one of the things that pops to the top of the list is actually gratitude. That clinicians say when they are thanked by a patient or a family member, that it does significant things to reaffirm the importance and purpose of their work and to strengthen them for going forward. And there were very big distinctions between being thanked by a patient and being thanked by, say, the CEO of the hospital. The CEO of the hospital thanking you, well, whatever. A patient thanking you made a huge difference. So gratitude is a lever. Better systems addressing things like scheduling are a lever. Now, the philanthropy leaders, they can't touch a lot of that. Somebody else in a C-suite down the hallway is going to have to address some of the systems. But I look at the other things that are helping to create purpose, resilience, resolve, joy in our physicians. They are things like getting back to the idea of purpose. It is compassion, satisfaction. It is connectedness with patients. Physicians are also saying like, hey, practices to promote well-being are great, but please do not tell me to write in a journal, to sing Kumbaya, or to start doing yoga. And please don't tell me to get a mindfulness app. Like, all those things are nice, but you cannot address system failures with individual solutions. And so as we're engaging with clinicians around gratitude, I think that it's a way to give them back purpose and control, to strengthen their own well-being, to bring meaningfulness back into their work. And so with that, one of the things that's really bothered me, irked me, we're often, when we're starting grateful engagement programs, going out and saying, hi, we need donors and money. And so we want you to identify people who could give us those things, and we want you to refer them. So we've taken folks who are already kind of under the bus, if you will, and then we've said, I want more of your time, I want more of your attention, and I want you to help me kind of do my job, so to speak.
Mhm.
And so physician engagement, it's the wrong thing. It's about physician partnership. It is about synergy, a two-way street, virtuous circles that, as they help support gratitude and love of mankind, as demonstrated through philanthropy, there's a feedback loop that also should make them feel better. And we have to illuminate that piece of that, and also realize that what they get out of this is every bit as important as what we prospectively could get out of cultivating relationships with donors.
Right. Just two thoughts as we begin. Thank you so much for that, Betsy. One is, I wanted to acknowledge the people in the chat. Some people have written directly to the host and panelists with some very kind words, and I just want to echo those and thank you for those. Betsy is very open and passionate about all this work, both personally and professionally. And it's always great to acknowledge that in the same way that she's talking about we need to acknowledge our physicians. So I just wanted to say that. So thank you for those notes in the chat, and keep them coming. I also wanted to ask you just a quick departure from this. If those things that you're talking about to help prevent this clinician burnout as our true partners, instead of trying to extract things from them, working with them, if those kinds of things also can help with our own crisis of development personnel at all levels with all titles, in that burnout seems to be an issue. We seem to have trouble recruiting people to positions or retaining them. Are these some of the things that we can do also internally for our own staff in order to ensure that we can attract them and keep them, especially the rising generation, Gen Z?
Absolutely. So, performance is a reality. We need to raise money. We need to meet our metrics. We need to do other things, but our job should be more defined by the impact we achieve and the relationships we cultivate than by racking up points on a board. And so I do think being able to engage in meaningful ways with patients and with physicians is also the way back to getting the joy back in our work, to understand what people's stories were. You hear incredible journeys of transformation in hospitals. You hear stories of people who've overcome incredible odds, who've experienced hope and joy within our walls, to start to have conversations with patients about why they are moved and motivated to give to us, I think can also kind of inoculate us against burnout. And talking to those physicians about what they are doing, what they are seeing, and nurses as well, physicians and nurses on the front line, they are such incredible intermediaries between us and patients to engage people in a culture of love and support. And I always go back to philanthropia. You know, philanthropia came from the Greek and is about a love of humankind. We should never forget that the roots of our profession come from a love of humankind. There's nothing about philanthropia that was about money. There was nothing about philanthropia that was about meeting fundraising goals. It was about demonstrating care and concern for other humans and for lifting them up. And so, you know, one of the things I say to folks all the time, we are participants in noble work. We need to remind ourselves sometimes that we are called to the privilege to be catalysts and to be conductors, to pull people together, to transform healthcare in our community. There's only so much that can be done by payments from commercial insurance and from Medicaid and Medicare. Our path to innovation, to elevation, to transformation is clearly tied to philanthropy. And so when we are the ones who are facilitating those relationships, what an incredible job we have that will lift up every person from each walk of life in our community.
I want to make sure we dig a little bit into another concept that was actually in the title also. You've been talking a lot about gratitude because it's so foundational to this and also so ignored. But another piece is about harnessing donor insights. And maybe as a bridge to that, I don't know if many people know this, you studied, among other things, journalism. And I'm wondering if then in that study of that early on in your professional life also contributed to your ability to not just look at ways of trying to get stuff out of people, but trying to ask questions that elicit personal responses so we know what is the connective tissue between them and us, whether it's a clinician or some other kind of donor or a patient or any of the other people we interact with in life. We were talking about listening before and its role in gratitude. And as we kind of bridge over and talk about donor insights, I wonder if you have any insights specifically on the kinds of questions that have been helpful to you and other people in the field as they navigate that role of our partners in development, but also just in general in talking with donors.
Sure. So I do think there is a place to just be naturally curious, to want to understand what someone else's journey and experience are, what their perspectives are, what they've gone through, what's made them, what shaped them. I think there are so many things that we get the opportunity to ask donors that you would frankly never ask a person on the street. You know, donors often give us a path to see their values, how they want to be remembered, what legacy they want to leave to their community, what dent they want to make in the universe. And so I think really being present in those conversations and having the courage to really ask people what they believe in and care about is an incredible privilege. It's also foundational to creating the quality of relationships to create ongoing partnership. We do ourselves a disservice in my mind when we are over reliant on, oh, well, here's this person and they have a wealth screening indication of this. One of the things that I really love about DonorSearch, and I know we're not here to talk about DonorSearch, but one of the things I love about DonorSearch is it's a much more holistic approach that allows you to see more than just, you know, defining someone by a wealth screening score. And we need to try to get to a point that we are understanding people's mindset, how they want to engage, how they want to make a difference. Because at the end of the day, the qualitative information that you're going to secure is going to be fundamental to creating the quality of relationships you want.
It's absolutely true, and it's hard to quantify warmth unless you're actually just talking to people and asking good questions and letting them be themselves. but that does get to the whole issue about harnessing donor insights that we precede this session with. And I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about that, about how that can be done both individually and collectively, especially because, as you said, there's a lot of pressure on healthcare institutions to raise money. It's the place where you have margin and you can do good things. So what kinds of information should people in our field be looking for, and where might they find it, whether it's talking to an individual or trying to get it on the whole database?
Sure. So, I think it's another kind of and proposition. You have to build the relationships and you have to be smart enough to use the business tools that are out there. Most organizations that I work with, they don't have enough staff. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough time. They don't have enough influence. And so it is critical to focus on the best opportunities for their organization. And so with that, they need to bring together the information that you can get by virtue of relationships with, data, artificial intelligence, other forms of analytics that are available to couple those things together in order to set priorities, to utilize their resources well. So I think you've always got to think about how you pull together kind of the soft side and the data to take a more holistic look at another human being to determine, do they have the affinity? Do they have the ability? Are they the best prospect for me to be talking to right now? I think we've got to do our due diligence on the front end. At the same time, I think we've got to be careful not to over-index on our due diligence. I think we all can get, almost analysis paralysis, if you will, that great old term, that you've got to know what tools you have, how to use them in an efficient way, and then to move on and actually go out and talk to other humans rather than hiding behind our desk waiting until we have a perfect scenario where we know everything about everybody. Because there is a balance in getting the information you need and also taking action.
You don't mind, but I'd like to take a pause and just ask the audience. This is my Who Wants to Be a Millionaire question. If you all would just let us know if you have sensed analysis paralysis in your office, either because there wasn't enough information, because I've certainly heard that many times, or you have all this information now, you're not sure what to do with it. If you have thoughts on that or comments on it or questions, I hope you'll just go ahead and open up the chat and tell us what you think, because this is something I've heard about continuously, and I'm sure that we lived through it in a very rich and meaningful way, because over the last 20 years, we've also encountered the fears and concerns over the appropriate ways to understand patients because of HIPAA. And that was a learning process. I think it probably still is for many people. So if you have comments on that, please do put those in the chat. This idea that sometimes we have almost too much information to know how to move forward. Do we have some tools now that are helping us with that? I know that the discussion about AI is one of those discussions, but is that a panacea, or are there some tools that have real practical results that you've seen at healthcare institutions?
Yeah, again, like DonorSearch is one of them. There's so much power and utility within that system that, why would you not deploy that effectively? I also think one of the exciting but prickly, dangerous, terrifying things out there is certainly ChatGPT. There's so much we can do to reduce our burden of work by using some of the tools that are out there. But if you've not played with ChatGPT, you can literally go out there and say, hey, ChatGPT, will you write a draft of a letter to a donor who has given to a heart campaign? It's terrifying that in 30 seconds, it can spit something out. And so you've got to think about, how are you going to balance the technological capabilities that we have now with the ability to utilize our discretion and to be personal and also to be ethical and appropriate. There's, as you know, Nathan Chappelle, the great Nathan Chappelle, who's off doing other things today, has been really a leading voice in that space. And there's going to be a conference that comes up in the fall, a free conference from Fundraising AI, talking about the ethics and the utility of some of the tools that are out there. And I think it's something that all of us need to be watching.
thing you alluded to before about the difficulties, particular difficulties in healthcare and healthcare finance is something I've heard from others. We talked with Alice Ayers not long ago about this issue, and she talked about these startlingly thin margins. So first of all, for those who haven't heard about this, can you talk about those margins, and then also whether or not some of the things we're discussing can help to, to change that a little bit, so organizations can plan for the future, provide the kinds of care and services that we want, maybe even invest in development so we can do more in the future.
Absolutely. So, if you go back historically and you look at hospital margins over about the last decade, we've typically hovered at around 2% for a median operating margin. The problem with that is that financial organizations like Moody's and Fitch and others have said that a healthcare organization needs about a 5% operating margin just to stand still, just to replace our current physical plant, just to invest in the latest version of our existing equipment. There's nothing in there about innovation, acceleration, going to a new place. That's standing still, and that is elusive to most. But as many of you know, in the pandemic, certainly we had financial implications from the pandemic that were unforeseen, but a lot of those were actually abated by the CARES Act and other things that came forward. But what happened is, you figure you get away from the pandemic, and a lot of the problems have remained pervasive as COVID has become more of an endemic issue. Yet a lot of those supplementary dollars are gone. And so healthcare organizations have seen two of the worst financial years on record. I can't remember what the number is right now, but like 60% of hospitals last year finished their year in the red, upside down, no money, nothing to reinvest in community. And so, you think about that situation, you can see where healthcare executive leaders, they're worried about paying the next payroll. They're worried about making those basic replacements of those gurneys in the ER that the wheels are falling off of them. You lose the ability to dream and to be strategic and to innovate when you do not have money. However,
terrifying. That's terrifying. I mean,
it's terrifying.
If they can't pay the bills or can't pay the staff, what happens at a hospital?
Absolutely. So, healthcare executives in my mind, they're not focused. Many of them, most of them are not focused on our future right now. They are focused on staying alive. And I think that in some places, philanthropy has not been seen as part of the solution. We have still been seen as the nice to have, the also ran, the cherry on the top. We've not been seen as an alternative revenue source that could provide the money that is needed to do big things. However, if you're sitting on this call this day and you work in healthcare philanthropy, we have to go advocate for the value of our work. We know philanthropy has one of the strongest returns on investment that is available. It is a safe, low-risk alternative revenue source that most organizations are not tapping in a meaningful way. And so, now this kind of flips back over to grateful patients. So if you're going to optimize this revenue source, patients and family members are like real estate's location. Right. It's where you need to pay your attention. It's where the money is. And if you take it to the next piece, we know that trust is fundamental in building those relationships into a place that people would invest. And there's a lot of information that says the general public trusts doctors and nurses. 85% of people say they trust doctors and nurses. Only 64% of people trust health systems. And so when we go out there and lead with, we're a healthcare system, we have immediately lowered our own trust threshold. So we've got to think about if physicians and nurses are deeply trusted and they have the ability to build this connective fiber with our patients, wow, that's where we need to be paying attention.
Betsy, a couple of things on that. First of all, do you think the reason that the institutional framework of a discussion is depersonalizing? Is that why it's ineffective? And I'm also curious if this is something that clinicians recognize. I mean, these are a lot of smart people in medicine, but they aren't going around thinking about money all the time. I mean, they're thinking about patients. So do they recognize this? And does that make them more likely to be our partners?
I think when they understand, and again, I'll go to the virtuous circles that exist,
Right.
to understand the power they have by creating a great relational experience with a patient.
Mhm.
That building that trust and connectivity means that people are not only more likely to comply with their medical protocol and to return for subsequent care, they are also more likely to be an advocate for or a philanthropic investor in the healthcare organization. And so I think that we have not always put a light on all of the implications of building relationships with our patients. And so if we can get into it and talk about, what does this mean for clinicians in terms of their well-being? What does this mean for our healthcare organizations? What does this mean for our ability to reinvest in our organizations? Because I believe every physician who goes into medicine wants the best possible practice environment in which to work. They want their patients to come to a place that has that feels like a healing environment, where they feel that things are clean and hopefully beautiful, and that they have the latest technology, the best providers. If we can start showing people how all these things feed in together, I think physicians have a lot of reasons to want to help us.
It sounds like there's a lot to do, but I'm wondering who the case really needs to be made to first. We always talk about a case for support. So who is our first and foremost audience as we try to get organizations to make this shift?
Absolutely. It's our own executive leadership. I am astonished, Jay, how often I go in and talk to senior leadership teams in hospitals, CEOs, COOs, CMOs, everybody who's got a C title in front of them. And they go, philanthropy, sounds nice, decorative social endeavor. They have a gala. They're not seeing us as part of the solution. And often when we're not seen as part of the solution, there is an incentive to be the gatekeeper, to keep us away from the clinicians, to keep us away from the board members, because they often don't think that what we're doing is a serious endeavor. And they often do not think that it's actually something that is shaped by best practices and processes and science, that even when they think, oh, philanthropy has potential, they often think this is about social glad handing, that we're nice. And so I think that we've got to first help our executive leaders see the power, potential, and ROI of philanthropy, what the levers are that we need within the health system in terms of positioning, identifying projects, getting access to stakeholders like board members and clinicians. If our executive leaders do not believe in our work, we are always going to stub our toes.
Now, this is, I know, one of the things you do in one of the professional hats that you wear with Accordant. So if you were going in to talk to a hospital or a system, now I'm really terrified of that expression. If you went in to talk to some kind of healthcare organization and you were talking to the board, what is it that, what essentially is it that you would say to them to try and get them to shift? Because they don't always listen to the staff, even if the staff is preaching from the same script.
I don't. And I feel terrible looking at my exceptionally bright and professional philanthropy colleagues who have been saying the same things until they are blue in the face. And yet their boards don't always listen. There is sometimes truth that you need to bring in somebody from far away to say the same thing that you've been saying in order to get someone to listen to you. So often when I go in and work with boards, the first thing I talk about is the financial rationale for philanthropy to be positioned as a core revenue source in healthcare. I then talk to them about the primacy of grateful patients and families members as a constituency. And there I'll make a weird little distinction. You do not have a grateful patient program. Please banish that term from your lexicon. It is not about a grateful patient program. Grateful patients and families are the most important constituency you have. And that constituency is a thread that runs through every single thing you do. Your communications, your annual giving program, your mid-level program, your major gifts program. It's not a program. It's through everything. So talking to the board about that so they get it. Also talking to the board about the importance of project selection. Let's make a deal. Let's quit raising money for stupid stuff. Let's quit backfilling budgets. Let's quit rising to the call of urgency and instead be smart. And those are the conversations that I have with board members, because board members are often positioned with enough influence to even move other stakeholders within the organization. You've got a lot of board members who already live a charitable lifestyle. They're already philanthropic. And when they can come alongside you as advocates, even with your own executive leadership team, there is power to that, because sometimes they can break through ceilings that you simply cannot.
It strikes me as you're talking about all this that those conversations must be great, but I can imagine that they're looking for something that they can see as tangible. And it might be something like, okay, let's do a capital campaign, or we received a large estate gift last year. So is that the kind of thing that you mean? Are those examples ones that you can build on, or maybe even point to as a way to get people off their rear ends and start thinking about the entirety of their service, delivery system, all the grateful patients as being the lifeblood of institution, by pointing to something as concrete as capital campaign or planned giving?
Absolutely. And, I always believe in a good capital campaign. Capital campaigns can really recalibrate everything you're doing. I think the new misnomer for capital campaigns is a lot of them are not about capital. So to think about kind of a special campaign initiative, it can be inclusive now of capital, of clinical programs, and of community health initiatives. Now, I'm going to totally sidebar on that on just a second. But to go in and show them, even when you're working on a capital campaign, you better be looking at your physician and clinician partners as storytellers, advocates, connectors in that work. Because again, if your patient and family members are primary constituencies, how are you honoring that as you develop your strategy around whatever you're doing from a giving standpoint? Now, while we're here to talk about grateful patients and families, and they're really important, I would say the one departure from that is in the community health space. There's a lot of work going on right now around community health, equity, and access. That is giving us an opportunity to bring in that larger community who doesn't necessarily care about the hospital per se, but who cares about elevating the health status of their communities. So with all of this, you've got to know kind of where the pieces fit together, where you've got departures. Grateful patients are the primary constituency in my mind for anything you're raising inside the box, inside the four walls of the hospital, all of those clinical programs. When you get outside the box, your patients may care, others are going to care too.
So people walking away from all this, because it's a lot of good suggestions, are there 2 or 3 things that you'd say, you got to do this as kind of an internal assessment before you have the chance to bring in somebody like yourself to talk with the board, before you try to initiate a new program without the support it really requires, before you try to sit down with a whole bunch of clinicians and change the nature of the relationship? Are there 1, 2, or 3 things that you'd say, look in the mirror first, here's what you need to do?
Could I give him 46? I would say on one hand, you do need to know where you are right now, and if you're using the resources that you have appropriately. Most of us are going to be in a resource-constrained environment. As I mentioned earlier, we're not going to have enough staff or money or time or influence to do all the things that we want to do. And so if you're going to really elevate a grateful engagement strategy, what resources do you have in-house that you could redeploy to this? And I will admit to sometimes being a gala killer. Yes, I'm a gala killer. If you're spending 6 months of your year building a party that's going to raise $250,000, you have to ask yourself if that is the highest and best use of your time. Because we know that if you are proactively cultivating relationships with physicians and clinicians, and then bringing in patients who are moved and motivated by your work, who have the capacity to make investment level gifts, you can do so much more. So start with figuring out What do you need to stop doing? What resources do you have to redeploy? And then figure out what's the roadmap for going forward. I am astonished how many organizations I go into who do not have a strategic plan for philanthropy. The strategic plan for philanthropy is rinse and repeat. We're going to do what we did last year. We're going to add 3% to all of our budget lines from last year, and we're going to do it over again. It is so dynamic out there right now. Healthcare is markedly changed. Philanthropy is markedly changed. We also need to be cognizant that we have a continued and marked decline in the number of donors who are participating. Most of us are failing, frankly, at stewardship, with half the people that are giving to us not coming back. And so it is time to take out a blank sheet of paper and create a strategic plan. And that strategic plan needs to look at how are we not only engaging grateful patients and families, but what are the programs we're deploying? What are the metrics we're using? How are we going to bring our boards in a more meaningful way? We need to really know how we're going to use the resources that we've got. And then, since you gave me 3, I've already done 2 things: assess where you are, see what your strategic plan is. The third is a little bit more nebulous, but I would say work on your relationships. If you think that you and the folks that you work with who happen to have philanthropy titles can do this alone, you are wrong. I know how committed you are. I know how hard you work. I know you're willing to give the extra mile. I know you're willing to pile more on your shoulders than you ever could. However, a small number of people in a philanthropy office can never be as successful as creating a swarm of people who believe in the power of philanthropy, who believe it's not imposing on patients, but giving them an invitation to relevance, who are positioned to articulate the story of the organization. We've got to build relationships with executives, with board members, and clinicians. Those 3, first and foremost, because that's the way we create extenders and connectors to enable us to do things we could never, ever, ever do otherwise.
Thank you so much for all this, Betsy. And I do want to acknowledge that someone in the chat had said, first of all, this is great info, but when and where is your next speaking engagement? We started the top by talking about AHP, but you're all over the place. So where can people see or hear more about you and about your work and the work of Accordant?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. So next week is, in my mind, the big dance. We all get to go to the Association for Healthcare Philanthropy in Orlando. If you've not yet bought your tickets, I'm sure AHP would be delighted to make space for a few more knees around their table. So I'm doing an innovation lab at AHP in Orlando next week on Friday afternoon. We're going to be talking about some of the trends and issues, and then we're going to be doing an interactive design thinking session talking about where philanthropy must go next. So please come if you're thinking about it. I'm also out and about. I'll be speaking at the Ohio Association for Healthcare Philanthropy in the fall. I'm often at other public events. Please feel free to connect with me even on LinkedIn. If you're looking to think about philanthropy, hopefully I'm occasionally pushing out nuggets there that could be meaningful to you, but I'm always up for a conversation. I believe deeply in the power of this work. I also, as we talked, earlier, I've spent a whole lot of time these last few years being a patient. I deeply understand the power of this work to enable you to care for your family, to pursue your dreams. If I ever doubted working in healthcare, now I never, ever could. I have been so transformed myself by healthcare that I want everybody to love it and get behind it. So please connect. Find me on LinkedIn, call me on the phone, whatever it may be. Thank you. Thank you for asking where I'm going to be.
We're going to make sure to put that in the show notes as well. So if you're not catching this live, but you're catching this as a recording, make sure you click that link and check out Betsy's work. There may even be a link to one of her speeches that she's made that was particularly impactful. Thank you, Betsy, not just for today, but for all you do. Really do appreciate you.
Thank you, my friend Jay Frost.
And I want to thank everybody for hanging out with us today. I encourage you to share this with the people in your offices and your board. They are really our partners in this work, whether they know it or not sometimes. Certainly the clinicians are the same, but they definitely are our partners, and then we all want the same thing, which is, to care for everybody around us. And how can you do it if you don't have the money to? And that's where we all fit together. So with that, I want to encourage you all to, of course, come back. We have another session tomorrow more sessions next week and the next week and the next week. You can check all that out over at our friends at DonorSearch at DonorSearch.net. If you're not signed up on the list for all this content, I hope you'll sign up right there on the homepage where you can learn out about future programs in the Mastermind series, or you can see under the resources tab, literally hundreds of these programs there and on their YouTube channel. We really do hope that you'll enjoy all that and come back again soon. And if you have comments or suggestions for things we can do in the future to have incredible people like Betsy here in the program, just send me a note directly. My name is Jay Frost, and you can reach me at Jay, that's Jay, at DonorSearch.net. So until next time, take care and stay healthy. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.